2 a.m., which means we're going live late, as we sometimes do.
Nah, we never go late.
We never late.
Here, not a
It's
sentence.
to judge from an open. It starts when it starts, and it'll end when it ends.
And
And
it
we'll
starts now. Here's this agile thing, a division of the organizational efficiency show.
effectiveness
Limited, yes,
Effective.
and effective. Still working out the branding.
and, and
Oh,
perfect timing.
Wow, this
and
is
there's
great.
Tim.
All right, we are just at the introductory standpoint. So this is the organizational effectiveness show. Here's this agile thing. I'm Mike Markey.
I'm Matt Bean.
I'm Jeff Singleton.
Tim Ottinger.
Tim
Hey,
Ottinger. So, welcome, Tim, to the show. We've been looking forward to this conversation. Have you ever heard us before? Have you ever seen us doing our thing before?
I must confess, this is my first.
You don't know who we are.
Someday,
I'm just kidding.
someday, we're gonna get a guest who knows who we are, and then we'll know. Then we'll know something.
Well, I'll see if I can drag some people along.
Awesome.
Kicking and screaming.
Tim, maybe the first question is, what are you doing in Britain? You were from the Chicago area, aren't you? I mean,
Yeah. I was. I grew up in Indiana, and I was living in Chicago area, up in the north suburbs, for a number of years. But my wife and I fell in love with Scotland, and this is where we live now.
nice. Awesome.
Cool. So what is it? It's about 4 p.m. there.
Yeah,
Not exactly.
that's right.
Okay. Awesome. So, I don't know, Matt. You reached out to Tim. Do you wanna give an intro to what brought him to our presence today?
Yeah. So, Tim, you had a blog post, I think in 2021, about the scatter gather pattern,
Yeah.
and it
Pattern.
struck me. Yeah, pattern. So it struck me because I've been working with team. I've been a consultant for a while, going into different places, working with teams and organizations. I've seen this, I think, every single time, and it's super common where you're doing some version of Scrum. You've got a time box. You plan at the beginning, and you come up with the idea of who's going to do what. You throw it out into the sprint. Everybody does their stuff in parallel. You bring it back. The first thing I was struck by, I don't know if this is interesting or not, but the first thing I was struck by is it's not just a workflow pattern, it's an architectural pattern in software, the parallelization, which I think is interesting. It's actually super useful in places where stuff is automatic and there's low communication. I don't know, we can get into maybe if it's interesting, the theory behind it. But the thing that struck me about it was this is everywhere. And it seems like the way to think about it is it's super inefficient. There's a bunch of reasons why it's not great. But what organizations tend to think, or what the coaches I've talked to tend to think, is you go from it's good to take a journey from scatter gather to something more like mob programming or ensemble programming, where everybody's working on the same thing at the same time. So I was interested in, why does everybody do this? Why is ensemble programming so counterintuitive, or why do people not want to do it? Is there a better thing that we should be, if you're in this situation? Is ensemble programming probably the thing to do, or is there a better thing to do? And just like, I think that's sort of like the shape of my interest in it. Does that make sense?
Okay. And the only thing that I could add to that is just to level set. There may be audiences who are entrenched in this pattern but don't recognize that that's what it is. So could we maybe just, for a quick overview, describe what the scatter gather pattern looks like? We might even do a pop-up when we actually publish this thing.
That'd be great.
Okay. Do you want to? Can you do that, Tim? Would that be
Sure,
okay?
sure.
Okay.
Sure. So, by the time I'd written it up, I've seen it so many times, I could probably describe it in my sleep. But the typical situation is, so there's teamwork, and there's, scrummish ways of working with time boxes, and that's fine, right? So we take some piece of work, and in this particular case, sometimes you divide the work up, Sometimes you split it with components or with skills. So here's a piece for the DBA, here's a piece for the UI, here's a piece for the back end, the front end. People do this, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And the intention is that we'll do this work in parallel, which if they're actually, independent whole jobs, you could do them simultaneously. We could say, Monday morning, okay, everybody go. And that could be okay, but we're delaying integration, but maybe that's all right too, right? So we have some tests. At the end, we'll take the pieces and we put them together. If we're really smart, we would have one branch for the whole feature that everybody would work in, but typically not what happens. Typically people have branch per ticket. So it's fragmented pieces of the job. And at the end, we'll pull all those data together and we'll integrate those and we'll try to make a deployment. Well, that's not so bad. I mean, it has its problems and it's common enough, but let's get worse. Let's take everything that we want to do and divide it all up. So Matt, you get 3 pieces of the first story, 5 pieces of the second story. Jeff, you get a piece of the third story and 2 pieces of the first story. Mike, you get 1, 2, 3, and a couple pieces of 4. Oh, we have pieces of 4 left over. Jeff, you get those. Now you have a queue of work. It's a whole bunch of different things. And you're going to do them all in separate branches. And what we hope is when they're all done, we can gather them all together, integrate them all, and make a release. The odds of this are extremely small, and it creates a lot of complication and confusion along the way.
So it seems more efficient because you can, I mean, if you want to start earlier, I mean, if you want to finish early, you start earlier, which seems to be the assumption on all of
That's right. If we're going to get these things done, we got to get them started, right?
We have to start now. And we assume that we can manage all this complexity, doing all this stuff in parallel at the same time, more or less, even though we're really switching.
Asynchronously, it's really not parallel.
Yeah, and even more, if I've been assigned 5 things to do, if it's efficient for us to scatter the work among the members of the team, it would be just as efficient for me to scatter the work among myself. So I will start all 5 things, look at what the deadline at the end of the sprint is, and pace myself for delivery at the time of maximum. We want to minimize probably that merging time, right? So let's do all the merging all at once for all the features. That would be,
and then when we're
that'd
all
be the
done, we
most
can have a
efficient.
hardening sprint.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That'll say that'll solve everything, right?
Yeah. Then we'll have time to integrate all this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully the folks at home are listening to this and going, "Hey, that sounds eerily familiar." And when I've been I started through development. I lived through this myself. I've been coaching for 11 years. And I've seen, like Matt, I've seen this pattern repeated over and over and over again. And I have incrementally tried to make this better. I've incrementally tried to say, let's focus on finishing a story as a group. We're dividing up this work, but let's try and get all our component pieces of one of these stories done as soon in the sprint as we can, so we can call that story done before we move on to another one. And that seemed like a baby step that was occasionally helpful. But what's your observation on that, then, Tim?
Well, people are pretty smart and they're trying to do a good job, and they don't want to make too much upset at once.
Mm-hmm.
So let me back up and throw out a principle. Oh, we lost somebody.
Oh, Jeff fell out.
Okay. About 95% of preference is familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and people tend to propagate the system they rose through. If I was successful in a system, it's probably because the system recognized my superiority and my hard work. And so it's probably a pretty good system. So, people are going to do what they do. So when you come up with something that's new, a different way of working, it's going to be unfamiliar. So immediately that raises some hackles.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you don't want to be too unfamiliar because, you don't want to have people just cast adrift. So what they tend to do is they will tend to take and divide the work up per individual, per team, and then try to pair or mob on it. And
Okay.
there's no sense in that. That really is 5 people doing the job of 1. Once I've divided it into
Mm,
one person jobs, what's the point of putting more than one person on it, right?
yeah.
And if I'm supposed to
Okay.
pair on Matt's one person piece of the story, I'm kind of not as useful. But if we were to work on the whole story together, we would find ways to make it a 5 person effort and get it done quickly. But again, you're trying not to cause too much upset. So why don't you guys pair on one of those? Why don't you
Tasks.
mob on
Yeah,
one?
just to see how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're right. You would be doing that. That would appear that would be more inefficient to do it that way. Although you could rationalize it. You could say that if we're going to do, I've worked in a lot of environments where peer review is a big deal.
Mhm.
So we'll say you're going to write this code and one of your other teammates is going to review it. So if that's going to happen anyway, we might be able to skip a step if you two work together on it because one of you could be reviewing as you're coding.
Yeah.
And if we can demonstrate value in that, then maybe we could open the door to, well, if it's good for this, maybe it could be applied even at a larger scale. What if we tried a mob or ensemble thing?
Yeah.
It,
So
so
there's
what do you think?
there's a period of the experiment that we have to deal with too, right? So
Yeah.
if we're doing scatter gather, once we've scattered, the pieces are out there. We're not sure what the status is for some time. Things are going to be worked on solo. And as you mentioned, if you work solo, you tend to have some kind of quality gates because individuals make mistakes.
Hmm.
You know what? 5% of the code base
Maybe.
when you're working in a big project?
Yeah.
If you're lucky, right? You know what percentage of your primary language? 40% of the syntax?
Yeah.
Probably about that. 15% of the standard library if you're lucky,
Hmm.
right? How about the deployment environment? How about your end user's workflow? Individuals don't know enough. Individuals make mistakes. And they seem like logical mistakes when they're made. They're not intentional. So if you have people working solo, you've got to put quality gates behind them. Someone has to review it, just like you said,
Hmm.
right? And of course, when we're scatter gathering, we put out 15 pieces. All of those are going to have to be reviewed individually and together. So there's a lot of extra work. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, the idea is, why can't we, work it together? Well, okay, with the scatter gather system, because of that complexity, things get returned from review, they have to be reworked, other things are later. So quite often, something that takes 2 days worth of programming to get to the end of your pipeline can easily be 100 days. It's not
Hmm.
unusual. Everybody's very busy, right?
Yeah.
But nothing's getting done, only pieces. So how long does it take? Well, maybe it takes, 50 days, 100 days. Okay, how long are you going to run your experiment on mob programming and on pair programming? Are you going to run a 200-day experiment? Or are you going to do it for a week and see if you like it?
Yes. So you're not even getting to valid data if you don't set it up in a long term.
Well,
You
it
can't
depends on if
see the
they
difference.
if
Measure
it
the
depends.
difference.
It does depend on if they found value in it. I was working with a couple of teams, and one of the teams, at least two of the teams have went into pair programming and went, you know what, this is actually useful. We enjoy doing this. We think we're getting better results, and they self-selected into continuing that experiment,
Mhm.
right? So, what were you
But
going to say?
they enjoy it is one thing, but they objectively achieve higher throughput and value is different,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I guess, Tim, what I hear you saying is that you can't really get an objective. My thought was, and this is what I'm curious about, Tim. If you've, I'm sure you've taken teams through this journey from scatter
Mhm.
gather to something more like ensemble focused, the team doing one valuable thing at a time with an outcome you can get feedback on. Was it in the context of something time box like Scrum, where you could say, with scatter gather, we got 10 things done per sprint, and after X number of 200 days or whatever, with ensemble, we got 20 things done per sprint? Like, were there compelling numbers like that? How do you measure that? What's
Yeah,
your
so
thought?
it's a lot of fun. So I have another article on our blog. I'll bring it up and share it with you. Faster and More Predictable is the name of it.
Interesting.
And I'll copy this for you. And it
Yeah.
looks like I made up numbers. I tried to make it look like making up numbers because I averaged 2 or 3 different companies' actual numbers together.
Got it.
But
Obfuscation.
in this, I took an example of a piece of code that it took someone about 2 days to write. And I showed how that often will take 100 or more days
Hmm.
just
Okay.
because of the queues and waits and returns. It's
Hmm.
just, it's turbulence in the system, right?
Yeah.
And then we've taken teams and had them down to where the average time to go from green light to deployment is about 2 to 3 days.
Hold on. Repeat those numbers for me, please. To
Yeah,
get from start not having started to the
yeah,
actual value in the end
yeah,
user's hands, the
two to
thing
three
that the
days.
customer pays for, went from 100 to 2.
Yeah, yeah, because most of that time wasn't programming time.
Yeah, it's
By the way,
amazing.
this is an important point, and probably people watching this need to see that. From a certain point of view, from a distance, say a height,
Mm,
from some point on the org chart, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
sent something down to development. It's been a month and you haven't seen it yet. It's been 2 months, you haven't seen it yet. In your mind, that's programming. That's what's going
right.
on. They've
Oh,
been writing that
yeah.
code for 2 months.
Boy, development takes a long time.
I just want a
Yeah.
button, man. Just put a button on the screen. It's taken 2 months. Well, it
Yeah.
didn't. What happened was it sat in a queue.
Yes.
It eventually got around to the programmer. The programmer spent a day and a half to 3 days on it, roughly 2 days,
Yeah.
right? They got something happening. Good. Okay. They put it in a queue to have it reviewed. And somewhere between 2 hours and 5 days later, somebody picks that up. Well, it's already been in the queue almost as long as it was in actual work. And you know what? To reach them in that queue behind all of the other jobs they were doing, including things that have been returned from code review, things returned from QA, things returned from system test, merges that failed, it may have taken 7 days to get to them. They did
Hmm.
2 days worth of work. Now it's sat for 5 days. Well, finally it moves on. Maybe it comes back and they have to, repair something. And it finally goes on. So I get this code out to QA. If it passes QA, then it goes and it sits in a pile. Why does it sit in a pile? Well, because there are other things that we want to release too. So we'll just leave it in a branch. And when we climb to where we want to make a release, we'll go to all the branches whose features have completed, and we'll try to assemble a brand new version of code that's never existed before anywhere on Earth out of these branches. And if the merges will go well and it goes into the branch, then we'll test it. And then we'll see if we can release it. Well, now you're talking a month or two down the road,
Yeah.
easily. What, 3, 4 sprints? Is that unusual? No, people do a release every sprint, but they're releasing things from 5 sprints ago.
Yeah. So you know what this reminds me
Okay.
of? The idea of flow efficiency,
Yes, absolutely.
right? Yeah. And I mean, back when we used to do value stream mapping, we would not be surprised at all if 15%. So one of the things that I've been talking to people about is there's an essential trade-off. Let me know what you think of this, Tim. You have basically two options. You can say, we will pay people to work and they will be working all the time, 100% utilization, or we can make sure that the work never stops. The work is always moving through the system. You cannot have both. Is that ring
Yeah,
true?
yeah. So my awareness of this actually began with Lean and value stream maps.
Yeah.
And when I
That's
saw
the
the
point.
human processes are typically about 5% efficient. And if you can get up to 7 using scatter gather, oh my gosh, you're a hero. Scatter gather is not a process that easily lends itself to any efficiency or to management even. So, if you're 7% efficient, you're doing great. Whereas if you
7%.
eliminate a bunch of these queues and waits, and if you can eliminate the backflow, which is the worst,
Mm,
right? Again, I do, I finally get the work, I do the work, I send it out. It gets 3 steps down the pipeline and it gets rejected back to me. In a
Hmm.
value stream map, it goes forward.
yeah.
Okay, we've got a loop. Well, when it loops back, it has to go through every one of those steps again to reach that point again where it can pass to the next step. And if it's rejected again, it has to come back through again.
Yeah.
So when they say, Mike, why can't you predict when this work will be done?
Let me show you the system.
Yeah.
It's the system is innately unpredictable.
Yeah, it's because the way we think about the work is leading us to create a system and tolerate it that just objectively. So you have to go see, you have to paint the entire picture of the whole system and actually instrument it so you can say 93% of the time, this work that you waited 4 months for, 93% of the time inside the system, it was just sitting there.
Yeah.
It wasn't moving. Yeah.
And if you wanted to do it, to make the numbers easy, if your 95% of the time is spent in queues and waits, then if your programmers were twice as fast, how much time could you save?
Almost nothing.
Yeah, 2.5%.
Yeah. So that so the answer is not to work harder. It's not to get people to do the death march. It's to clean up the obvious mess that is keeping us from just like
Right.
getting way more. The value.
But
is
that
not
obvious,
taking
but that
away.
obvious mess is the wait time and the queuing.
And it's not
Right.
obvious to people. That's what was so
Right.
interesting to me in the first place. Everybody does this scatter gather thing, and when you say, let's just have the whole team work on one story, we'll define who it's for, what the problem is, why it's worth doing, and we'll describe simple acceptance criteria. We'll write them in a bulleted format. They're simple assertions. You can elaborate. They can evaluate to true or false. When they're all true, we're done. It's the problem from the point of view of the user. Team can do whatever they want in terms of implementation, right? Everybody on the team will gather it. Sometimes the QA person, quote unquote, will be talking more than the architect, quote unquote, but the team will do one thing at a time. And you'll get more value at the other end. People go, I'm not paying people to sit around and look at each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also, Matthew, remember what is 95% of preference?
What they know.
Familiarity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what they were raised.
So what are they likely to do? Well, they're likely to within themselves to divide the work up into one-person jobs because everybody knows that you're faster to write the code by yourself. One person typing is as fast as you can go.
So
Yeah.
it's a human. It reminds me how we took doctors. I don't know the details on this. Maybe I'm speaking out of ignorance. But there was a time in the 1800s when doctors would literally perform an autopsy and then go straight into delivering a baby, and they wouldn't wash their hands because everybody knew it was a waste of time. And if you said, hey, by the way, it might be a good idea to wash your hands before you're performing surgery, they might pull your license. They knew you were wrong, right? It's just like it's what people were. It's so powerful that what people.
Kent Beck brought up another one. He said from the time that they found out for certain, they had absolute proof and they knew that citrus fruit prevented scurvy on long shipping routes. How long did it take before the Navy made that a standard practice? Does anybody remember this from Kent?
No.
100 years, I can't remember.
215 years.
That was sitting in someone's queue for a long time.
Yep, it took 215 years to become a standard practice. It is frustrating, but again, look what you're facing with. Habits aren't like T-shirts. I can't just throw my T-shirt off and put on a new one, and if it's a habit, because my old T-shirt doesn't come back and jump up on my body when I'm not looking and I'm in a hurry. Right?
Yeah.
Your habits do. You always fall back on habits under stress.
Yeah, and it's important to say, it's humbling, right? I'm not saying I'm different. This is a human thing, and I'm a human. I'm not saying look at those dumb humans. I'm just reflecting on how do you change it? Everybody has to be part of the change. It's not like somebody can write a check and change the thing, and
Right.
because the way that they think about it is the way they encourage the system and they pay for it, and so it's interesting.
Yeah. So I always struggle with this because to me it seems so obvious now. It's
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah.
I can tell that they're doing it the worst way possible. Literally the worst way possible. But I can't say that. And what we really need is for something to happen so that they're willing to accept an explanation for why they get the results they always get.
How do
Okay.
you do that? What do you
Yeah.
say to them?
Usually
what
it's a crisis.
Okay. So, I was at one client, and whenever they would have a crisis, they obviously were segregated, sitting in cubicles, people were scattered around. Even when we would do sprints, getting a room that they could all be together in for any length of time was problematic. But every time that organization had a hot job or a fire or some terrible thing, they dragged everybody who ever had a hand in creating that thing into a room, locked the door, and wouldn't let anyone out until they'd solved the problem. That was,
Set up a war room.
yeah, the war room approach. Yes, because there was this one obvious room that was available that was almost never used, and we kept saying, "Can we use it as a scrum room?" They said, "No, we need that in case there's ever a need for people to work together."
Yeah.
Which is always right.
Yes, I know. It's like, do you think maybe we could have eliminated some of the need for that war room by just acting in that model from the first place? All right,
Here's
so
a pink or an orange in case you need one. Yeah.
By the way, that's what happens with the scatter gather, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. Did I cut you off?
No, go ahead.
Okay. A lot of times what happens with scatter gather is something starts to gain heat. Some feature gains heat, right? So we're on user story 29233. I'm going to forget that number before I finish my story. 29233. And so a manager steps up and they said, "We've got to get this thing done. What's the status?" And it's like, "We don't know."
Yeah.
It's in 27 different pieces. Some of them have been done. Some of them aren't started. It's across 3 different teams who have different priorities. We don't know.
It's literally
And-
impossible to know.
Yeah, well, it's possible probably if you need to have a ticket tracking system with all the roll-ups and all of the status reporting and all the and it has to be current because it takes a sophisticated system to track 15 different features that have been split up, each 20 different ways.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sophisticated, but eventually you can find out, where it is by consulting your system.
yeah,
That's why we have to have things like that. In XP, we didn't need that. XP was done on index cards.
Sticky.
yeah,
It was easy.
It worked.
So you get this complicated system, and then the manager says, "Okay, everybody, I don't care what you're working on. If you own a piece of 29233, right? Thank you. If you own a piece, drop whatever you're doing and work on only that piece. And we're going to have this integrated, and we're going to set up a war room, and we're going to get this all together, and we're going to have it out by Friday. We've got to have it out by Friday." People, "Well, I have 3 pieces. I can't get them done." Well, then we'll reassign them to other people. And now they're all working simultaneously, literally parallel, not just async, but literally parallel. And they're integrating and they're talking to each other, and it gets done. And then the manager says, "Oh, whew, we
now
did
go
that.
back
That
to
totally
work.
worked."
Now go back
Yeah,
to the
now go back to
nine-year-old
work.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So you said that it'll take an emergency of some kind. So we just had one. We
Sometimes.
just saw this happen, right? You got everyone in a room. We solved the problem efficiently. How do you capitalize on that
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
go
good
to
luck here,
that as
right?
a more
Like now you say, could we also do that with 29234? Can we do that one and get that one done too? Because there are people waiting for that,
yeah. Are there any other potentially things that might blow up in the next day or so? Why don't we just get those out of the way now?
Yeah, and can we do it without overtime? So now
Yeah.
the crisis is over. Can we just work a normal work week, but let's take the next most important thing? And sometimes that can work. But remember, it's already been split up and partially done. So that step to, well, why don't we just take a story and do it is a bit different. By the way, the opposite to a crisis also can work is when you have a team that just likes to do work and learn better ways to do it. Now,
Open to experiments like that.
that's not just the character of the individuals on the team. That encompasses some management and some kind of an umbrella of safety too, right?
Safety, exactly.
Okay.
I think one of the things that's in the back of my mind here is this whole scatter gather thing. Was it intentional, or is it just something that we fell into and it's reinforced by, well, this is what we've always done because, that's what we've always done. Doesn't matter whether it worked or not. This is what we've always done. And except in a crisis, when in those rare situations where we actually get together, we get stuff done, but then we fall back into old patterns. And I know old habits die hard, but there's got to be something better than just a crisis to illuminate teams as well as management, because I think there's something else going on environmentally that is helping to keep the cement of, yeah, this is the way we've always done it, and we're going to continue to do it that way, even though it doesn't work.
Is the thing that's so as you're describing that, I'm picturing two types of teams. One is a team of generalists that all could work on any piece of work, and so when they divide up the work, they're really trying to parallelize things. But the more common pattern is silos of capability within teams, where so the scatter gather pattern appeared to make sense with that because this is work that BA would do. This is work that a developer does. This is work that a front end guy does. This is work that a tester does. And so naturally we would assign those components to those people with those capabilities, which further reinforces them as the one person who can do those things, or one of several. So we reinforce the silos. Which came first, the silos or the egg? So when you've got one of the questions we've got from a listener right now is their environment is made up of silos. They've got a lot of different roles within a team, so their work doesn't appear to be something they can all do together. There would only be one person with the ball at any given time. Does that still work for a mob or ensemble environment?
It's a change, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it is a change. But there's another piece with that I think part of that is if I'm the DBA and I've got 40 hours of work to do this week, and you're the front end person, you've got 40 hours of work this week, and Matt's the back end and he's got 40 hours of work to do, and Jeff is the operations guy and he's got 40. Okay, we're all going to pull together and work on this one story. That's going to be
Doesn't
hard
line up.
because for me to work with you, my work is at risk if I work on yours, and your work is at risk if you're on mine. And if you have individual, rank and yank or individual assessments, there's two management philosophies behind this that are really hard to get around, but you can, but they're hard, right? And managers aren't evil. They're just trying to do a good job, right? Well, one of the things you'll hear is, if you want something to get done, you've got to make someone accountable for it. So you have to pick the person, and then, okay, well, what are these other people going to be responsible for? Well, they need to have something to be responsible for, or they're not going to get the work done. And then the other one they say is, well, you can't have work that's not assigned. We've tried that. We put up a job and said, hey, when some of you get a few free minutes, work on this other thing because that's really important. And nobody did it. Well, of course they didn't. They had 40 hours of work apiece. They thought, well, if somebody else comes free, they can do it, but I don't have time for it. So unassigned work, if you have a full load, is extracurricular. Nobody wants that, right?
Yeah.
And if we each have jobs we're going to be personally held accountable for, we have to do those jobs. So as long as we believe that we have to have individual assignments and individual accountability, we will make that happen. And we will do that. And it might be okay until we start breaking tasks down into the silos and splitting them out even further. Because now we find out if we bother to track it, we make a value stream map, we track ticket aging, we track feature delivery times, lead times. If we start tracking, we'll see that we're doing very, very poorly indeed with this system. And sometimes people just want to do a good enough job that they'll look at it and they'll say, well, we did this to be efficient, but it doesn't seem like it's really making us efficient. What can we do instead? And that curiosity can come up with a different way of working. And there are a bunch of different ways to bust this, right? I mean, if we were actually in parallel and in communication, we would probably be done.
Okay. And so is that what drives the, or is that the mission statement for ensemble programming then? Is to try to remove the or minimize the wait times?
Yeah, and the backflow.
Okay.
The backflow is the worst.
Yeah.
First time through is tough, and there's a blind spot. And you guys, I don't know how many of you are math majors and things and statistics people.
Even
but
if we were,
but
that's
if
okay.
you were, it's not intuitive. So let's say I have I'll call it a gauntlet, right? I have a series of quality gates, right? Let's say that, I don't know, I have 4 or 5 of them, and each one of them has a 90% pass rate.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
quickly.
Most people will think, oh, I've got a 90% chance of making it to the end of this thing. You know, I'm going to go right through. It's going to be no problem. But we know that actually the way that this works with probabilities is you get the product of them. So if I have like 10 quality gates at 90%, what's that come out to, like 34% chance of making it through
It's
on the
way
first
less
pass?
than you would think,
Yeah.
unless you did the math. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to
Not like
calculate the
90.
product. It's really not as good as you think. And then if you incentivize, right? I'm going to track my QA people and reward them by how many defects they find. Okay, what we want to do is drive down the pass rate. If we can get the pass rate down to only 40 or 30%, then we know the QA is doing a great job. Okay, what about code review? Well, we're going to be strict on code review. We've had too many bugs. So I want you to lower the pass rate. I want you to become really strict with that.
Yeah.
And of course, these things happen after you finish the work. So what did we do to let programmers or help them or enable them to write the best code that's going to pass all the way through and have a high first time through rate? Well, nothing. We've given them no advantages. We split them out on their own, doing partial work that they don't always understand. And then we set strict quality gates to where statistically they have a 30% chance of maybe making it through. And we've incentivized people to send things back. You know, how are you going to make that efficient? How are you
Yeah,
gonna
I've
make
seen that.
Demoralizing.
I've seen that get even worse, where at the same time they were rewarding testers for finding defects, they would penalize the developers if a defect was found, which caused the developers to hold on to the code even longer and wait even longer to get it to the next stage. So they slowed things down. Or they gave up entirely and just waited for the reviewer to give them the answer.
Yeah,
That was-
just
that was
ship
the-
everything and let them
Yeah.
send it back because it's easier. And
Yeah,
then they
they're-
complained they had too many interruptions, right? Because I've got 7 tickets out there with my name on them, and people keep coming back to me to ask questions about it or to send it back for work. If I had only 1 ticket with my name on it, I'd have 1/7 as many interruptions.
Yep.
Good point.
But that's
Seems to me that we're used to being very role centric. And if an organization really wanted to change, changing your focus to being more product centric, and you can't be both, it's got to be one or the other. And so if you did successfully shift your environment to be very product focused, regardless of the roles, then you could possibly get over that hurdle. Because that's that whole siloism. I mean,
Well, you would slowly break down the silos. You would hope that you would break down the silos. Like if you made a team full of silos and you said, we're going to work with Ensemble. So we're going to talk through and work together as each of us does our thing, grabs the keyboard, does our thing, or whatever, or talks. It might be a good idea to talk about the actual practice of Ensemble programming and what that actually looks like. But as we do that, though, everyone's observing every other piece of the puzzle being put together. And so they will, over time, learn about those pieces to the point where they'll start picking up on what they would do in that case. And you're building a team with much broader T-shaped skills.
Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to go with the silo thing. And
Okay.
the change other than a crisis is if you can see the numbers, right? If you can see the flow, and maybe sometimes people have to hire, a consultant for that. You don't really have to hire a consultant, but if you're going to hire one, you're going to get me. But if you're going to get a consultant in, but you can do it yourself, take a look, see what your pass rate is. That's one thing. That's going to give you some percentage. I have a gate where there's, don't know what I did there. 90%, 40% for review, 90% for testing, 99% for build, 99% for vulnerability scans. That is, first time through is about 64%. That's not that bad. Doesn't sound so awful. And when they do that in a simulation, they get 48% backflow. So for every 2 tickets they put out, one of them comes back and has to be fixed. It doesn't seem like a great rate. Okay, well, if we do that, how many times is it going to pass through with the reviews? Well, to get, was it 10 tickets through? Is that what I said it for? I have numbers in front of me. Yeah, for just 10 tickets, it'll take 16 reviews at that rate,
That makes sense.
Jeez,
Yeah.
that sounds like a
right?
lot.
So you think about all the manpower it's going. Well, if we were measuring that, right, then we see that with the silos that we maybe don't have a great pass rate, and we see that we have late integration, and how long does it usually take to resolve all of that, and how much of our newer work is that disrupting to send things back to fix integration problems. If we could see that, right?
Yeah.
The managers are smart people, the developers are smart people, everybody in the thing. These are adult people, mostly with degrees, all of them with jobs and experience. If they could see what was happening, they would start to develop, I think, a desire for things to go better.
So then, in the spirit of that, when you start working with teams, do you typically, like in the spirit of Kanban, say like make your work, figure out what your stages are, right? Don't think of it necessarily as roles, but as activities. You have to analyze. You probably have to write some code. You probably have to check the code. You have to integrate the code. Make the workflows explicit, and then maybe you want to add some waiting states, make it a flow board so you can see when stuff waits instead of is it being actively worked on. So you have to do, it sounds like you have to do, this is a question, it sounds like you have to do a fair amount of instrumentation to see the numbers and show people how inefficient it is. But then if you're moving towards a pattern where people are really kind of working all together all the time, does that stuff kind of fade away?
Oh, yeah.
Because, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if the three of us, four of us together can write a piece of code, and when we do that, our first time through rate gets up to 80% instead of 60. The amount of rework and unpredictability in the system starts to drop like crazy, right?
Yeah.
Often, if we find that we together can take a look at it, figure out how to do it, get it done in, say, an average of 3 to 5 days together, have it tested, and then it just runs through some automated checks, runs through some automated system checking, including our brand new tests, and it goes live. And now people above us can see, well, if I put a job in now, behind these other three, they're taking about 5 days apiece. 15 days from now, we'll be picking it up, and 20 days from now, it should be pretty close to being in production.
So then in the end, what managers are looking at to confirm the health of this new system is basically something like throughput, essentially, and making sure
Yeah.
that it's still, yeah, okay.
Yeah, by the way, throughput, when they start looking at that, people get mad.
Why?
Which people?
So people within the development group tend to become very angry because I sent in one ticket or 3 tickets.
Oh,
2 of them have already come out, 1 hasn't. So you've only done 2 tickets. And the team says, well, that doesn't represent all the work we're doing.
we're not getting credit?
We need to represent how hard we're working. And
We're
that makes it
very
look like we're-
busy. We are constantly active.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are working hard every single day. A lot of times skipping lunches or staying late, sometimes doing work from home. If we're working from all the time, maybe it's into the evenings. Well, this doesn't represent how hard we're working. I
Or
need
maybe this is
the
harder
numbers.
and this is easier, and you're treating it all the same is another thing.
Yeah,
I've heard.
yeah. And I need this to represent how hard I'm working because otherwise it makes me look bad. So I want to count all the internally generated tickets as well as the throughput. So I've had 3 tickets come in, but I've had 15 tickets cycling around inside the system. And I've had to do code reviews and integrations and fixing things. And they've been bouncing around for weeks and weeks and weeks. And yeah, these tickets came out, but there's other things in the pipeline. You're not counting how much the pipeline is producing.
Can
You're
I
only
get
looking at
partial
throughput.
credit?
Is that really about optics, Tim, do you think? Like,
A lot of it.
Well,
Yeah.
it can be. I mean, there's a lot of organizations where you've got a manager looking at members of a team going, how can I tell how effective that individual is being?
Right. I've always
Yeah.
said this is not about performance reviews. This does not affect bonus. Like ideally, the spirit behind this is it's like the oil temperature in your car. Do you know what the
Until
oil
you get to
temperature
reading
is?
about Elon's work at Twitter, where he fired people because they didn't have big enough commits with enough lines of code change per week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody can sweep in with an arbitrary, ill-informed, real, frankly, stupid idea of what the work is, have no real awareness, and can do a lot of damage. And you can lose some really great people who
Yeah.
probably were the anchors of your team but they didn't commit as much code per week because they mostly helped other people. And when they took a job, they took a really hard job that takes longer,
Yeah.
right? Usually your least productive people are your most senior.
Yeah. Right. Because they're
What
helping
does
everyone else,
productive
or they're
mean?
talking other people.
Yeah,
Well,
they're being
they're
senior.
thinking deep thoughts. They're planning the next moves. So when you're doing ensemble programming, does that require co-location? Do people need to be in the same room together to make that work?
Not for the past 10 years.
Okay. What tools help make that happen?
So we've done it. Tuple's pretty nice, by the way. I like Tuple. Okay, I don't have any relationship with that company, but I like Tuple, and I think it
Okay.
works nicely. We've done it over Zoom for a long time because of Git, and this is pretty sweet. So the way we can change drivers is I push, you pull, you screen share. Now you're the
Okay.
driver. Now in person, we change drivers every 7 minutes or so, roughly. Um, Online, we tend to go 10 or 15 because it has enough of a cost of changing that sometimes we'll go a little further. By the way, that's also how people fail at refactoring, is they don't run the tests because it takes too long to run the tests. So they do just a little more work before they run them, and then they end up running a debugger to try to figure out where they screwed up. So your feedback loop is important, but this isn't really a feedback loop. This is just us taking turns, and so 15 minutes doesn't kill me. It's all right.
Many small G-Paw Hill used
Yeah.
to, I can't remember exactly how he
Many
phrased it,
more,
but,
much
like,
smaller steps.
that's what it is. Many more, much
Okay.
smaller steps.
Yeah.
Another counterintuitive thing that you do the math and it turns out totally. Yeah.
Okay. What's the learning curve on this? Like if you institute ensemble programming, how long does it take the practice to really take root in a group?
Two different terms. First one is mechanically, you can learn it in the next 20 minutes,
Okay.
and you can start practicing. But you said take root,
Yes.
and now we're going to deal with something different. And I want to be totally sympathetic to this. Are we all programmers?
Yes.
We all are
Well,
or have been. Okay.
Have been.
Have been. Have.
Okay. So I am still a programmer too, among other things I do. What we do is, we talked already, we only know so much of our language. I'm trying to always expand my knowledge of my language and my framework and my stack, because that's really important, and my tools. But all of us, nobody uses 7% of what their editor's capable of. And they assume that the rest isn't important because they haven't used it. But probably it's really important and would save them a ton of time. They just don't know where to start, right? So we only know a bit of the language. We know a bit of the code base. So individually, we're like this to begin with. The odds are against us doing a great job. But number two, we've loaded our head with different practices and skills and principles and all these things. And we aren't sitting down with a calculator and we get a new feature in and we say, okay, well, that's 7 times 12 divided by 3 times the logarithm of, and here's our answer, and we type that in. It's not like that. We're intuitive, right? We feel what we want it to do. We feel how we want to go. And then sometimes as we get started, we think, oh, no, that's not the right way. Hold on. It would be better going this other way. Well, because it's intuitive, we kind of have to believe in what we're doing. We have to put ourselves inside of it, right? And so people tell you that they can't work in a group because it invades their personal thinking space. Well, yes, okay, I get that, because it has been always your personal thinking space. And what you're used to, what you're familiar with, is loading a whole problem into your head, letting your intuition chew, and then you type the things you think you want, and then you undo things a lot because, that's part of the job. It's
Yeah.
how everybody programs. But we have a lot of what's it, imposter syndrome in our field. And it's like, you can't observe me working because you'll think I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
I can't have you watching me. I can't be this. And then when we're together, I'm not loading it all into my head and then stewing. We're talking and I have to be aware. Well, a lot of people have absolutely zero familiarity with creating a shared thinking space.
Yeah.
That's the part that's hard for mob programming and pair programming. And it takes people a while to get it.
because
If
you've got to
they're-
externalize you have to take what you were doing in your head and put it into the group and have the group be your head,
Yeah.
as it were.
And the committee
Okay.
isn't all the different things you know in your head. It's all the people sitting in the room.
Yeah. Oh, that makes total sense. I used to say that developers had the worst self-esteems because they spend all day being told they're stupid by an inanimate object, and that they're telling what to do, right? So
Yeah.
you write the code and it just comes back and goes, nope, stupid. like okay, then this, nope, still stupid.
So a big barrier is sort of a form of psychological safety in a way. Like if they do something, what's going to be even if somebody isn't meaning to criticize them, they're very sensitive to something that might feel like criticism.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. When you get it right, the feeling of working with somebody who's your peer, right? That they know things that you don't know, you know things they don't know. You're combining your skills, your shortcuts and your tricks and your intuitive design sense, and you're finding the design signals together. It's really amazing. It is such an incredible rush. It's very powerful thing, but you've got to have done that. And if all you've ever had is a really bad college project where 3 of the people dropped out and you ended up doing all the work, then you're not going to appreciate what it actually looks like. I do have
You're
an
probably
article,
going
by
to
the
tell
way.
people, yeah. You're probably going to
Oh.
tell people that's not real. Like that's not how it works. And
Yeah.
right. Yeah. It's not. Yeah.
Which
What's
is
the
fair,
article say?
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh yeah, it's not real
Well-
to you because you haven't been there.
the only way I have to judge whether something's real or not is if it matches, if it's consistent with my experience, right?
Totally.
Not consistent with my experience, something's fishy. That grows a lot of science and knowledge, but it also grows a lot of conspiracy theories.
Yes.
That's not consistent. Pandemic, that's not consistent with my experience.
I've never seen that happen.
Something weird's going on here. Well, yeah, probably
it's
so.
fine.
And no matter what the situation is, if it's not consistent with my experience, it's going to smell fishy. And I need to have something that makes more sense of it than that.
Yeah. You were saying you had an article or another article.
Yes. So there's an article called Programming Under Surveillance, which explores a lot of the things people misunderstand about pair programming and mob programming.
Awesome. We'll find that and we'll put a link to it in here.
So, it is an interesting psychological problem. Now, what I've seen is when people start doing it, if they've got a pretty good rapport and they're not having to sit with somebody who abused them, or the person who repeatedly keeps asking them out even though they keep saying no, or the person who's trying to make them look bad to make themselves look better. If you're not dealing with that, people tend to click in pretty quick. And even after a week, they start to really think, wow, we're getting a lot of work done. This is going very well. And often after 2 or 3 weeks, it's like, why did I ever not do this?
Mm-hmm.
And even goes back to here. Do you have this?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's over there.
Yep. So on the way into the studies, 80% of the people expected to hate it. And this is pair programming, which is, by the way, harder than mob programming.
Really?
Oh yeah, a lot harder.
That's
And
counterintuitive.
80% of them expected it to be miserable and to hate it. And on the way out, over 90% preferred it to every other way of working.
Is it harder because there's really no place to hide because it's just 2 people? Is that?
Oh, hold on. I can't remember who gave me this line. If I could remember them, I would love to give them credit, but I can't. They said, if you want to think about it this way, if you think about pair programming's like a date, mob programming is like going to a party with your friends.
So there's like
You're
performance
staring
issues.
at this person across the table.
Yeah.
You better say something.
And you've got to be the next most interesting person in the conversation. Yeah, so it ends up becoming more of a contest of wills. It's in some ways.
Yeah, you're way more visible and conspicuous if it's just 2 of you.
Yeah,
And if it's not working, it's totally obvious.
I've been involved in pair programming sessions that were just inspiring. We just got so much done. We actually worked right through lunch into the afternoon and didn't even realize it. I've been in other pair programming sessions where I spent the entire time watching the person's ADHD just keep continually moving them off the task and going, dude, You stopped mid-sentence. Continue what you're typing.
Hey, I resemble that remark.
Yeah. Well,
So once again, the technical outcomes, the organizational throughput, it's all dependent on the human input, right?
Oh yeah,
The human
yeah. This is
something.
work done by people. Software development is a very human practice.
So far.
so far. Well, and so when we look at the concept of, the managers think development is this big, or they think it's this big, but it's really only this much effort, but they see this, and then someone comes in and says, look what I did with an AI thing that generated code in this much time. And you're like, well, so that's so much better. And you're like, well, it's not, because it wasn't this big. It was only this big. And now you only save this much, and you lost context, and you lost
Right.
Maintainability, maybe.
Yeah.
And if it lowers the quality, then it's going to come back more times. You lose more time with backflow than you could possibly gain by programming faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And you won't see that unless you've instrumented the system to reveal it.
And if you can't see that, you can't believe that.
Right.
So it's just, we have a couple of things going on. Self-knowledge problem. We don't measure what we're actually wanting out of our system. And we all have, as human beings, a little trouble dealing with shame. We don't process it well. I'm afraid I won't look good. I'm afraid that people will see that I don't have a solid formula for getting this thing, that it's an intuitive thing, that I don't know everything, right? And I can't admit that, because that'll make me look weak to my bosses. And then they're going to see that, and they're looking, things are bad. You got to find the weak member. Somebody here isn't carrying their weight. Look how long it's taking.
Where's
Yeah.
the
So
bottom
it's-
10%?
And they don't realize, it's probably the way they're managing it too. Had they not gone to a scatter gather system in effort of keeping everyone as busy as possible, they probably wouldn't have had 80%, defect rates. By the way, I didn't make that number up. I asked a bunch of people, how much of your work is on defects? And, either internally generated defects or, external. And most corporate shops told me between 60 and 80% of the time they were working on something that has returned.
And if it isn't now, it eventually will be. And at some point, that list of defects becomes largely populated by duplicates of other defects that are still waiting to get addressed.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if we could just, process shame and measure actual outcomes and maybe have some psychological safety, then,
Easy. That's all you
it's
gotta
easy.
do.
Come on,
Yeah.
just fix it.
everyone should just do it.
Yeah,
if you're
I'll
having
just write a
trouble-
book about it. Somebody will read the book. It'll fix everything.
And if you're having trouble, call Tim. He'll come help you. He's good at this. Tim, we're about at the end of our time box. I want to thank you so much. This has been amazing. This is what I'd hoped we would get out of it. Any parting thoughts before we have to close up shop for this week?
Just, let's all try to do things better together. That's been the soul of Agile when it started. I don't know when it turned into the solo async ticket processing hell that it was, that people think it is. But let's just not even bother with the A word or the ticket process. Let's just try to do things better together in a way that matters. I do want to give you, just real quick,
Yeah.
most people don't realize doctors do a lot of microsurgery. Do you know that that's not fun? It's not.
Microsurgery is not fun. You mean
No,
talking
it's actually
like
hard. They're
papers?
working
That's
through
when
the
they're-
computer, and they
they're
have to go
looking
through the
through-
glasses
okay.
and the screens,
So
and
it's
sometimes they
little
get
tiny blood
headaches from
vessels.
it. But you know what? It works better for the patient every time. And we're probably at some point have to get past the idea that, if it makes no difference, to the outcomes, then work however you want to. It's really a matter of preference. But if it does make a difference to the outcome, then maybe by being a little less familiar, a little less comfortable, we can have much better outcomes. And we have to decide if that's worth something to us.
It might be something like a professional responsibility. Or,
Yeah, well,
or frame it how you like, I guess. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I think this has been an Agile thing. I've been Matt Beam.
I've been Mike Markey.
I'm still Jeff Singleton.
I'll be Tim Bottinger for a while yet.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Right.
Tim.
Thank you
Really
so much.
appreciate it.
Appreciate
Good to
it.
see you.
Goodbye.
See everybody soon.
All right.
And I'm going to press stop.
Okay. So Tim, don't leave until you're browser says you're all uploaded.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was what it is. This is a different